And welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. We are leading you up to Game 2 tonight. Stars, Oilers in the Western Conference Finals. Joining us today to talk about the Western and Eastern Conference Finals, our good friend Jack Han, who is well regarded in the hockey world. I know Sean Shapiro was pumping his tires yesterday, as was David Castillo, friends of Spits and Suds. And we received great feedback when we had Jack on the first time. And just to give you some background, Jack worked with the Toronto Maple Leafs for 3 seasons in player development as an analyst and behind the bench with their AHL affiliate, the Toronto Marlies. Jack has also written Hockey Tactics 2025, which is now available. It's 294 pages of pro-level knowledge that's easy to understand for newcomers. We always talk about learning and growing the great game of hockey, and Jack's book is a terrific thing to pick up, a must read for hockey nerds, aspiring coaches, and players. I'm one of those hockey nerds who love to think the game. You can find all of this information at JHanHKY on X, his Substack, which you can subscribe to, which really takes you inside the strategy of the teams and the analytics involved. It's called Hockey Tactics Newsletter, so you can support Jack that way where he has thousands of subscribers, and for good reason. How's that for pumping your tires, my friend?
That's a perfect intro. Thank you, Gavin.
No problem. He's also an analyst. I want to make sure I get my Finnish right. It's Tappara, right? Tappara in Finland.
Yeah. So yeah, Tappara in Liga. Yes.
In Liga. Yeah. So let's start there, since you've spent a lot of time working with Finns and time in Finland. How big of a deal was it at the end of Game 1 when the Stars scored that empty net goal by Esa Lindell that the 5 players on the ice were all Finn? Heiskanen, Lindell, Granlund, Rantanen, and Hintz. Does that resonate in Finland?
Of course. I mean, like the Stars are kind of Finland's unofficial NHL franchise. It's so cool when such a small country is able to create, develop top players at every position on the ice. So it's great. Obviously these guys are great players, and it's a lot of fun to see them, have that 5-man unit on the ice.
In your Hockey Tactics newsletter, you went into 2 tactical details that can make all the difference in the Dallas-Edmonton series. Do you mind expanding on that a little?
Yeah, so I watched Game 1, and I would say in the first part of the game, Edmonton was outplaying Dallas, right?
Yep.
Like they had the Stars on their heels, and then obviously, a run of 3 power play goals made all the difference. But, for all of Dallas's strength in terms of their forward depth and in terms of having Ottinger in net and having, 2 high-end defensemen in Heiskanen and Harley, they're a team that's still a little bit vulnerable in terms of getting hemmed in their zone. And, they do a good job of sort of protecting the slot or the highest danger areas. But, Edmonton initially did a really good job of exploiting sort of the soft spot in the upper half of Dallas's zone, right? Like Dallas plays a fairly conservative D-zone coverage, especially when they're under siege. They're more likely to back off. And that's when you see, McDavid and Draisaitl get the puck and operate in areas usually where you would find defensemen, right? They go high near the blue line, and then that forces Dallas to chase, and then they reattack downhill toward the net, and it creates a lot of offense. So I think throughout the series, that's going to be an area where Edmonton's going to be at their best. And it's going to be up to Dallas to, first of all, survive those encounters. But second, like on the Tyler Seguin breakaway goal, maybe force the odd turnover that leads to quality rushes the other way.
Yeah, you were talking about that maybe Draisaitl and the forwards of Edmonton need to be careful as far as taking it toward that blue line, because that can result in odd man breaks for Dallas.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where that's where the fun is, because you're in the conference finals. You got 2 great teams that like to attack and operate in different ways. So whoever is able to sort of bend the game in their favor is going to end up victorious.
As a coach that's been on the bench, talk about what it's like from an Edmonton perspective when your team is shorthanded so much in a short period of time and you're feeling the momentum change.
I mean, Obviously at this point of the year, like everybody knows that it's not a good idea to take penalties.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you have to do it in order to negate, possibly a really high dangerous opportunity. So I think the first thing for Edmonton is to look at, okay, why are they taking these penalties? It's not so much about, trying to be more disciplined. It's more about like preventing, situations where you get exploited by Dallas's skilled players.
So you would say, obviously, that less penalties would be one of the tactical adjustments. Is there any other, after watching game one, that Dallas and Edmonton you feel, if you were a bench boss, could make to kind of change in their favor?
So I wrote about this late last night, but another area on the PK that I would talk about is how Edmonton defends. Last game was Matt Duchene, but whoever is a left-handed player working on the left half wall, because in the Vegas series, Edmonton had a lot of success shutting down Jack Eichel in that spot. Except Eichel is a right-handed player, so when you're on your quote-unquote offside, that means that the puck is in the middle of the ice and your stick is pointed toward the middle. So there's pros and cons to this. The first pro is you have a much better shooting angle if you do decide to take the puck and go for a shot on net. The main disadvantage is it's very difficult for you to hide the puck or to protect it from a penalty killer that's pressuring you from behind. Whereas when you have a lefty like Duchene, it's the opposite, where your shooting angle is not as good, but then the puck is, you can very easily shield it with your body, and you're forcing the penalty killer to reach through you, basically. Either they can take a penalty, or you can knock that stick away and get to the middle. You're on your forehand side. You have a much better vision into the middle of the ice. And I highlighted one play that led up to Duchene's rebound goal that basically is a big difference between what Vegas and what Dallas tries to do. And I think Edmonton would have to account for that.
We saw a different Stuart Skinner in the third period as well. And on that Duchene goal, I thought Sean Shapiro did a nice job isolating a picture where you could see the puck was on Duchene's stick and Skinner was on the other side, still looking, thinking the puck was behind the net. How much of that carries over as far as a goaltender's confidence letting up 5 in a third period?
So first of all, Sean is much more of a goalie guy than I am. Sean plays goal, so he has a lot of affinity for the position.
He does.
I just think that the Oilers are a very good team, but regardless of who they go with in nets, that's going to be a very big weakness of theirs. I can certainly say that Skinner is a bigger goalie, so in theory, if you keep play to one side, Skinner would have more equipment to get in front of the puck, as opposed to Calvin Pickard, who's more of a scrambler, a battler, a smaller goalie who's at his best when the situation is chaotic. So the best thing that Oilers can do for Skinner is to make things really simple in terms of his decision making and his reads, so that the puck is kept to one side of the ice. The situation isn't very complex. It's not very scrambly. Whereas obviously Dallas, they're trying to create the opposite conditions, right? They're trying to move the puck east-west. They're trying to take a lot of shots and jump on rebounds and generally make life complicated for whoever's in net.
You've watched a lot of Cody Ceci, and in Edmonton last year, he was big on the penalty kill. Edmonton struggling this year in the playoffs on the penalty kill. And Ceci comes and was pretty pivotal in the killing of some penalties the other night. What are your overall thoughts on Cody Ceci?
So funny enough, I just talked about Skinner being at his best when the situation is controlled or it's simple, and I think Ceci is the same thing. He played for Toronto a while back, so I was able to watch him up close quite a bit. He played for Ottawa before that. And the thing with him is he's always been a very physically gifted player relative to his immediate peers. And the maybe the reads or the decision making or the improvisational abilities were not quite there. And I think over time he's done a really good job of knowing what he's good at and what he's not, and being able to play the system. And on a PK, essentially, that's where he's at his best, right? Like he's a right-handed defenseman, which most teams have a shortage of. So just the fact that he's on his forehand defending the right side of the ice for him is already a plus. You know, he doesn't hesitate to block shots or get into passing lanes, so that's good. You know, obviously physically he's big and strong. So again, you know, he's at his best when his job is really simple, and then he can do it well.
One of the things you were tweeting about the other day that kind of caught my eye, and we talked about it on Spits and Suds with Sean Shapiro yesterday, is the emergence of Mikael Granlund. And we talk about Rantanen a lot, but Mikael Granlund has just been a terrific trade that Jim Nill made, and he's come up big in big situations. And one of the things that you were tweeting about was the salary cap going up and teams wanting to get better quicker. And that might mean overpaying. Would Granlund maybe fall into that category as a guy that's 33 right now, but you might see him getting more than he usually would in the market?
Well, I think when the cap goes up, it benefits every player, right? So no matter who you are, no matter what position you play, your agent is going to argue for percentage of the cap, which of course means that salaries are going to go up. There's going to be more teams with cap space to play around with, which means that demand for players go up. So I think it's going to be a rising tide that lifts all boats. From Dallas's point of view, I think there's a conversation to be had about retaining Granlund, certainly, but then, the reason why Granlund was available for a relatively affordable price was because he's bounced around, whether it's San Jose or Pittsburgh before that, or Nashville, and he hadn't necessarily had the best seasons of late. So are there opportunities to get another player who, again, has those skills, but maybe is in a situation where they're not performing as well as they could?
What are your early thoughts on the Eastern Conference final? It just seems like everyone's already putting Florida in the final against either Dallas or Edmonton.
Well, I've had people text me saying how dominant Florida is and how Carolina's completely out of their depth. But, this is why we play 7 games, right? It's not a best of 3 last time I checked. So the series is not over. And the thing is both teams play a fairly similar style. And when you have two good teams that play very similar, the team that's just a little bit better at executing can run away with it because the other team doesn't really have a viable plan B. And I think this is what we're seeing now. Everything's sort of going Florida's way, whether it is their execution or even the bounces or the referee calls. There was an early non-goal from Sebastian Aho that could have really changed things. So again, Florida's playing better now, no doubt about it. You could say that they're the favorites going forward, but the series is not over.
I wanted to get back to one of the things, since you are one of the experts as far as tactical adjustments and just overall in the power play. I absolutely love what teams now do with the bumper position. When you were coaching, is this, it just seems as though the bumper position is more mentioned than it has been in the past. Is that because of the NHL adjustment where you can no longer just basically take someone out in the middle and the middle's more open, thus teams trying to get it more toward the middle?
So, going back 10 years, you could already see certain players with a real knack for making plays from that position. When the Washington Capitals 1-3-1 power play was starting to really take over the league, whether it was TJ Oshie or, there were a few of those players in the league. And a lot of times it seems like it was a skill set that you could acquire, but you couldn't necessarily teach, or you had to have the right guy in that position to be able to play that way. But now I think teams are a lot better at interchanges and using rotations, or even individual players. I think a lot more players are realizing how important that position is, and they've really devoted time and effort into developing their abilities in that area. So now I think it seems like half the league has a guy who's really good there, which wasn't the case before.
Wanted to ask you real quick, Toronto Maple Leafs making some changes in their organization. You were there when Brendan Shanahan was the Leafs president after 11 seasons. Just your overall thoughts on Brendan Shanahan.
Well, I had the opportunity to work with him and talk with him, talk hockey. And I mean, even though there are lots of reasons to be disappointed, at the end of the day, like they made the playoffs, I think 9 out of the 11 years he was there, or the past 9 years. Obviously, getting out of the first round was definitely a challenge, but making the playoffs 9 years in a row and getting to the second round 2 times, like not many teams are actually able to do that, right? There's probably a handful of teams who've done better. When you think about, let's say, the Colorado Avalanche, who we regard as a very successful team because of their Stanley Cup win, they didn't get out the second round all that often either. I think they only did it either was once in their cup year or maybe another time. But so, it's tough being in a market where there's so much expectation year after year. And obviously, if you win, then you get more credit and more attention. But also, if you don't win, which what happened most years, you don't win, then you get a lot more heat for it. So, if you take a couple of steps back, 9 playoff runs in 11 years is actually quite an accomplishment. And I think it's just too bad that most Leafs fans will remember this team or this time period as a disappointing one, because it's actually the most sustained success that the franchise has ever had.
Well, and they're very similar. They're like the Yankees or the Cowboys, where obviously just heightened attention and just a massive fan base. But I don't know. Like I was saying this the other day, like they lost their starting goalie. To me, that was a massive factor in that series.
Yeah, it is, and Joseph Woll could have played better, but there were a few games where he played really well, and he stole a couple games. But the main thing is I think when the NHL was a 6-team league, the Leafs had consistent success, but again there were only 6 teams. Now there's 32, so I think this is why the newer franchises, whether it's Dallas, whether it's Florida, whether it's Vegas now, I think their fan base is more realistic in the sense that they've only known the team post-expansion, where you're not going to win 4 cups in a row, or you're not going to be a contending team every single year. So I'm from Montreal, and a lot of Habs fans are that way too. They're thinking about the glory days of the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Sure.
Like that's never going to happen again, right? Because there were 6 teams and then 12 teams in the league. Now there's 32. So just mathematically, your odds of winning or doing well or contending are that much lower.
So just recently, about an hour ago, the General Manager of the Year nominees were the Jim Gregory Award. The nominees were Kevin Cheveldayoff of the Winnipeg Jets, Bill Zito of the Florida Panthers, and Jim Nill, the 2-time Jim Gregory General Manager of the Year, nominated for the 3rd straight year. I mean, I'm not trying to go against Stars fans, and I get heat when I say that. I think this time I got to go with Bill Zito. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think all 3 choices are certainly
amazing. Yeah,
are certainly good ones, and those are I would sort of lump those 3 teams together in terms of building around their core, right? Or in case of Florida, they obviously made a big change going from Huberdeau and Uyghur to Tkachuk, but aside from that, there's been remarkable stability in those teams, and I think it's the correct way to build a good NHL team or any sort of organization, which is, before you think about subtracting, mostly what you should do is adding around your people, right?
Right.
When obviously lots of water have gone under the bridge since Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn were the 2 go-to guys for Dallas, but they're still around, right? They're still chipping in. They're still in more of a supporting role. Jason Robertson had some struggles at big moments in the playoffs, but he's still around, and there's probably still some game-breaking plays that he's going to make the rest of the way. Now they've added Rantanen, so whether it's Winnipeg or Florida or Dallas especially, those are 3 teams that have held on to their best players and were able to add around them.
I did want to end on this because he is from Frisco, Texas, our very own Seth Jones. And as a guy who has been an analyst for a number of years, one of the things David Castillo and I were talking about was we'd love to see Seth Jones in a winning system, because you look at the clubs that he was with, the Blackhawks, Columbus. It's just, now that he's in Florida, it just seems as though people are talking about the play of Seth Jones. What have been your thoughts? And did you always like Seth Jones as a player?
So the interesting thing I think that maybe more casual fans don't appreciate is I think a lot of a player's perceived value or perceived competence is actually tied to how much money that they make, right? Because Jones signed a massive contract with the Chicago Blackhawks, and then he was overutilized or maybe overexposed on a very weak team, and his stock went way down because of that, basically, right? If he were making league minimum salary, I don't think many people would have a problem with that. But now, he's making $7 million a year, which actually is turning out to be a very reasonable contract for a top four or top pair defenseman, however, wherever you would have him. So it's like his contract is looking better every day, and in turn, that's affecting his general perception in the industry.
Well, we know you love your Maple Leafs, but fingers crossed, maybe you'll root for the Stars. Although, is Edmonton Canada's team right now?
I think so, but I've been high on the Stars since the start of the season, and especially after the sort of the deadline additions that they made. So, who I don't really care who wins. I just think that Edmonton Dallas is a great series, and I'm just really looking forward to watching these two teams play against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. At J Han HKY, you can find Jack on Twitter /X. His Substack is the Hockey Tactics newsletter. And don't forget, you can purchase Hockey Tactics 2025, a must for hockey nerds, aspiring coaches, and players who love to think the game. Thank you so much. You mentioned at the end of the interview last time we spoke that you'd come on during the playoffs. You're a very busy man with everything you have going on. So I really appreciate you taking the time, Jack. Look forward to speaking with you again.
No problem. Enjoy the rest of the series.
Thank you so much. That's going to do it for another edition of Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle. We'll be back after tonight's game with a recap. It's Stars Edmonton, Game 2 from the American Airlines Center. We'll be back after the game, hopefully popping some Frosties with the Stars going up 2-0. We will see. We'll talk to you then on Spits and Suds. Until then, enjoy the day, everyone.